All right, here we go. We're at the second foul. So we're talking about the four categories of harm that compulsory rules have for kids. And the first category we addressed is the damage or injury or degradation to the relationship between kids and parents that rule enforcement engenders. And this is the second foul, the relationship with the self. Um, and so I'm just going to start reading here. Every time a kid has a rule forced on them, it carries with it a negative message about who they are as a person. And this gives the kid a reason to doubt themselves. Put differently, there is no way to enforce a rule on a child and guarantee that the child won't take it personally in some way. And so then I illustrate this with a comparison between rule enforcement for adults, for example, getting a parking ticket, versus rule enforcement for kids, like brushing their teeth. And this really builds on the discussion earlier about trying to crystallize the difference between rules. When we say rules, this means very different things for adults and children. Adults can opt out and children can't. That's the primary difference, but there's a lot more to it as well. And this example with the parking ticket, I think, draws those differences out. And so basically the first difference, an adult getting a parking ticket, if you compare that with a child brushing their teeth, the parking attendant doesn't scold the adult when they give them the ticket. It's not about them personally as a driver or as a person. It's simply, part of the job for the parking attendant to just hand out the tickets. Whereas when you're making a kid brush their teeth, there is often an element of disappointment or frustration on behalf of the parent that I have to force you to brush your teeth. Why can't you just brush them on your own? Why don't you care more about your health? Why don't you do what you're told? It's bedtime. Stop, lollying around. Get ready for bed, right? It's packaged in this whole kind of moralism of what you should be doing, and I'm unhappy that you're not doing what you should be doing. Whereas the parking attendant is not unhappy. In fact, the parking attendant might be happy because if there's nobody violating the parking rules, they might not even have a job. So parking attendants are often even sympathetic, right? They'll tell you how to pay it off, where to go, perhaps. But it's kind of funny to even imagine it's sympathetic teeth brushing enforcing parent, right? What would that even look like? So sorry, I got to make you brush your teeth here. If I wasn't so strict about this, you wouldn't even have to. I don't know. Right? Those kind of jokes and humor would just be out of place. Okay. And then the biggest difference is that, I'm not sure why I didn't start off with this. The biggest difference is that the child doesn't understand the context in which the teeth brushing rule is being applied. Whereas a driver getting a parking ticket understands the idea. Adults understand that there's limited parking spots, that we can't just park willy-nilly. There's, you can't leave your car in the parking spot indefinitely. There's a time limit, etc. And participating in this whole thing of driving means you have to kind of play ball, and these are the rules, and it all makes sense. And the adult understands that if I go pay off the parking ticket, it doesn't say anything about me as a good or a bad person. I just pay it and I'm done. And if I don't want to park or pay for a parking ticket, I can ride a bike or walk or go somewhere else. So adults understand a whole lot about the context of what's going on. Whereas a child doesn't get it, right? The whole point is that they don't know what the reason for brushing teeth, avoiding cavities. They don't know what root canal is. They don't know what having a nice smile is. They don't know what dentures are. And so they're presented with this framework from a position of ignorance. And so this is really crucial. When you don't understand, then you start making guesses about what's happening and start to think maybe it's about me. Maybe I'm a bad person. Maybe, right? Like an adult that didn't understand parking got a parking ticket, they might think, and I'm sure some adults are a little deranged and think, oh my gosh, I'm a bad person. I got a ticket, right? And the parking people are angry at me and I'm deficient. I'm a bad boy in some way. But kids without this context are going to likely jump to conclusions like this, or jump to other conclusions. Who knows what it is? But it's a very different, rules are very different when you don't understand why. And they have a persecutory feel to them, or can. And then as I said, yes, adults can opt out of parking, but kids can't opt out of teeth brushing often, right? If they're not brushing their teeth, someone will find them and force the issue, right? If you're going to bed and you just go straight to bed without brushing your teeth and your parents notice, right? And often I've heard parents say, did you brush your teeth? There's a little bit of an inquisition going on. There's a whole reason to start lying. Yes, I did brush my teeth. How do you know? Do I trust you? Right? Are you a trustworthy person? Right? This becomes part of the issue of going to bed. Am I a trustworthy person with integrity that my word means something to my parents? Holy moly. Where none of that comes to bear with getting a parking ticket. Being trustworthy or not is not even part of the consideration. You either pay it or you don't. And then this last part, in the adult world, there are different people. The parking attendant, the person who gives you the ticket, is different from the person who enforces the ticket. And that person is different from the judge, right? And those people are different from the people who make the laws, the rules, the policy for the town in the first place. So all those people are different, which means that each of them is kind of a check on the others. And this whole process is transparent, it's objective, it's happening out in the open, and it means it's not personal. It's not about the driver. It is about the system that the driver is participating in. Whereas with the teeth brushing example, the parent is the rule issuer, the surveillance person, the judge, the enforcer, right? It's all these people packaged together. And when you have the whole thing packaged together, then, right, when you're judge, jury, and executioner, the problem there is that you get these ad hoc decisions that do not look objective, that are obviously not objective. And therefore, if it's not objective, then it's personal, right? You're just making any rule you want and any consequences you want. Well, then if, then you could make them in some other way that I don't suffer, that I'm not being punished, that I'm not being forced in a way that I don't like. So it is, open to persecution when they're all rolled in together. All right, so this example shows several reasons kids have for taking rules personally, for assuming it says something about them as a person, about their character or their self-worth. And this part's key. If I want a thing, but getting that thing is bad, then something about me must be bad. If some essential part of me is bad, then following my desires can get me into trouble. This means my own desires, my gut intuitions, are not to be trusted. And not trusting oneself is the heart of self-doubt and insecurity. And hence the second foul of rules is their damage to kids' relationship with themselves. There it is. I think that's obviously I think that's true. If someone is being blocked from something that they want, part of the message is that your own desires, something about yourself, is not to be trusted. It can get you into trouble. It wants things that are bad for you, and you need somebody else to police you. And the model here is that you need someone else to police you until you are able to police yourself. And policing yourself is, insecurity, self-awareness, but oh gosh, what are the terms? Well, insecurity and self-doubt, right? A constant worry and doubt that you're going to do something wrong, and policing yourself. And it doesn't need to be that way, right? The point of this book is that getting what you want is actually good. A big part of growing up is discovering good ways to get what you want. Right? You want something sweet. What's a good way to eat something sweet? Eating a whole bag of lollipops is it's not that that's wrong. it's just not a very good way of getting something sweet, because eventually it tastes disgusting, right? Eventually it's uncomfortable in your mouth. It's I don't know. I've gorged on sweets, and gorging on them is not a great way to get what you want. Um, and then on and on. I could talk about what good ways are, but that's what you're figuring out. You're figuring out good ways to get what you want. You're not telling the person that getting what you want is bad, that you need to be policed. Um, okay. Might lifelong habits of insecurity get formed in childhood? When kids are continuously thwarted regarding things as basic as eating and sleeping, coming and going, and paying attention to this or that, do some of them become adults who mistrust and war with themselves? See Chapter 10 for more on the consequences of mistaken ideas about human nature. And so, yeah, this could be a whole book in itself. The typical argument about human nature is that we have these basic instincts that were formed in our evolutionary past, and these are what we want, and then our civilized nature is trying to hold them back. And it's a constant battle, right? It's a very Freudian thing, but this is manifests in all sorts of different philosophies and outlooks, that there's a battle between your inner nature, what you want inside, and what your kind of intellectual self knows to be good or bad. And the inner nature is this emotional force, and then you have this intellectual rational force, and there's a balance between the rational and the emotional. And I'm saying that that is nonsense. That the whole thing is rational, that humans are not part beast and part rational. We are 100% rational, and our inner nature comes from reasons, just like ideas about diet and exercise come from reasons. They're all reasons, and what's happening inside is a battle or a competition or a collision of different reasons. Eating a bunch of cookies, there are good reasons to eat cookies. They taste good, that being the prime one. But there's also reasons not to eat too many cookies, right? Not being overweight, etc. Too many cookies taste bad, whatever. So the point is not to war with one's inner nature. The point is to try to understand all the different reasons as best one can, and constantly letting the reasons duke it out and trying to refine them, improve them, and rearrange one's preferences and priorities. And that does not have to be a battle.
Okay, now we are going to transition to emotions and self-doubt.
Over time, parents have generally relaxed the severity of rule enforcement. Corporal punishment is stigmatized. Parents recoil at the idea that children should be seen and not heard. And parents increasingly value freedom and autonomy. But since rules are still understood to be necessary evils, strategies have emerged that preserve rules by making their enforcement more gentle. While this strategy is well-meaning, it risks convincing kids that their own emotions are the enemy, and this sets the stage for warring with oneself. So this is a big point, and I really want to distinguish the sovereign child, taking children seriously, from gentle parenting. On one hand, gentle parenting comes from a good place. It comes from a place that wants to reduce, well, they'll certainly say anyway, that they want to increase autonomy. They don't want to treat children like, they should be seen and not heard, don't want to be autocratic, don't want to punish kids, etc., etc. And I agree with all that stuff. But the trouble is that they still want to, enforce rules. And in fact, one of the downsides, obviously one of the downsides, as I'm going to get to, is what that does, what these gentle parenting tactics do to a kid's self-perception. I'll just say it. Basically, a hard-nosed parent is kind of making it clear that they are the opposition, whereas this kind of gentle parenting shifts the blame and the responsibility onto the kid, because the parent kind of obscures their tyrannical role here and instead kind of uses manipulation and other tactics for a kid to kind of accept themselves as being at fault for wanting this or wanting that. Yeah, and then, well, I'll get to it. I'll keep on reading. For instance, one popular strategy for softening rules. Yeah, the point is that I think today, in a gentler parenting world, there's actually more rules and more rule enforcement going on than in the good old days. Back then, right, parents were more stern, more strict. There was corporal punishment. There was all sorts of terrible stuff. But there was kind of a break between when you were in the parent world and you did what they said, versus when you were out playing with your siblings or your friends or otherwise free. And you had this demarcation basically. And there were big chunks of time where kids were not under the watchful eye. When they were under the watchful eye, they were getting their butts kicked, but they often weren't. Whereas today, kids are always under the watchful eye of somebody. They almost never get spanked, which is great, but they also almost never get to truly express their freedom and autonomy. And that's what I'm arguing here. So this is not gentle parenting. It's very, very different. And I'm very opposed to a lot of the manipulation that goes on with the gentle parenting framework. And the point of this section is to describe a lot of the harm, to describe the harm that comes from that. Okay. For instance, one popular strategy for softening rules is to help kids control their emotions. The idea here is that the real problem with rule enforcement is the kid's expression of anger or unhappiness. If only kids didn't act out their anger, then the systems of rules would work swimmingly. To that end, parents and teachers counsel kids on how to control or regulate their anger. After all, adults rarely scream and shout when they don't get what they want. The sooner the kids learn to copy this behavior, so the thinking goes, the better off everyone would be. So that's the mistake here, is to treat anger. When a kid is angry, the problem is them acting angry and behaving in an angry fashion, the yelling, the screaming, the kicking, whatever it is. And that if that can be controlled, then this anger problem is solved. But the expression of the anger is not the problem. The true problem, from the kid's point of view, is the injustice that drives the anger. And that's what I'm complaining about here, is that, as with everything else, the reason the kid has for being angry gets dismissed or discarded or ignored, not taken seriously. And instead, the behaviors are focused on the outcomes. So the idea behind, controlling your emotions is that as long as we can get you not to act angry or too angry or disruptively angry, then we've solved the problem. But you really haven't. And in fact, you've sent the kid a very damaging message, which I'll get to. Okay. A parent counseling anger control for their child often sounds something like this. You are feeling angry at being told it's time to go, and that is natural. Take some deep breaths, relax, and let it pass. Besides breathing, kids are offered several methods for controlling their emotions, such as counting to 10, punching pillows, or meditating. And so you see this, this is like stock and trade of the socio-emotional learning curriculum, pedagogy, thesis, right? You see this a lot on kids' TV programming. A lot of this kind of like, they frame it as emotional control, emotional regulation, but really it is bullshit. It's bullshitting a kid. Just think how condescending that would be if somebody told you, right? If you're mad about something, and I'll give you an example in the book, right? And someone tells you, just breathe, like, give me a break, right? I know how to breathe. And I don't want to just breathe. In fact, when I'm angry, I don't actually want to not feel angry. I want to feel angry, right? I want to be angry, and I want the problem that I'm angry about solved. And so I think it's just a huge disservice to kids to tell them that solving their problems across the board is a problem, right? You always want them to want to be able to seek out to take seriously their own problems. Um, okay, what's wrong with this? It confuses emotional regulation with emotional mastery. It recommends suppressing or ignoring emotions rather than developing and using them effectively. And that really is everything. Emotional regulation from this perspective really isn't, again, it's not what we want. We don't want to regulate the emotions. We want to master them. We want to use them at the right time and the right place to the right amount. And kids don't know how to do that. Of course, that's, again, they're ignorant. How would they? How would they know the right way to be angry? Um, so I, what we're doing as parents is training them, teaching them, showing them how to be appropriately angry. And being appropriately angry has several parts. I would say the most important part is who or what are you angry at? It's always a who, right? It's not a what. If you're angry at a what, that's more frustration or annoyance, right? You're angry at the weather. You don't really get angry at the weather, right? Because the weather is not an injustice. You can be frustrated and disappointed, but that's different than anger. Anger is about a person, and a person who has perpetrated an injustice. And that's a complicated thing. Was it truly an injustice? Is what they did warranted or not? How do you know? Right? If it turns out that someone who committed some injustice against you actually, um, right, the facts of the matter are reveal that they were actually justified, well, then that's not an injustice, right? And justice is a very deep and rich topic, just like other things we're talking about, gratitude, um, forgiveness, apology, etc. These are these nuances. You want to understand them. You don't want to write them off and say just control your anger and forget about the question of justice here. You don't get to participate in that. You're too young. You don't understand, and so we're not going to talk about that part. I'm not here to help you with that. I'm here to help you stop screaming, right? That's not what we want. We don't want to help our kids stop screaming in anger. That solves our problem. It doesn't solve their problem. So, so emotional mastery is being able to be angry in a way that helps you address and solve the relevant injustice. Okay. Um, Take a mature adult who is mistreated at work. Adults know not to throw themselves on the floor and scream because they know that doing so would make it harder to get what they want, which is for their coworker to stop mistreating them. So there you go. Emotional mastery means when you get angry, you use the anger to get what you want, which is, again, addressing the underlying problem. So if you're getting angry at work at a coworker who's mistreating you, if you threw a temper tantrum, you'd be less likely to correct that injustice. Um, so instead of a temper tantrum, right, the best way to be angry at being mistreated would be to keep your cool, to show a calm exterior, and to go to the boss as someone who rarely complains, rarely whines, never throws a tantrum, and very clearly and logically says that, the coworker has done X, Y, Z. I'm unhappy about it, and I want it fixed, etc. In a very calm way. That's very persuasive to a boss and a much better way to get what you want. Is that emotional regulation? Not really. Um, they may do some breathing techniques just to like calm the face for the moment, but breathing techniques are not the solution. They are a temporizing measure until you can get in front of the boss. But the other thing is that if you are good at this kind of thing, if you know that your boss trusts you, if you know how to make your displeasure clear uh, without sounding like a complainer, right? That makes it easier not to blow your stack, right? If you know that you're good at making your case, wow, it just got dark. If you know that you're good at making your case, then you're more confident, and it makes it easier to keep your cool because you know that you've got this handled. Pause this. All right. Mature adults don't suppress their anger. They don't just accept or ignore the causes of anger. Instead, they choose to direct it in a way that they have learned will get them what they want. So it's a common theme, right? Getting what you want is good, over and over and over, right? What we adults do is we get what we want, and we want kids to try to get what they want. Okay, jumping a little bit. It is therefore counterproductive to teach kids that anger is something to be suppressed. Unfortunately, emotions tend to be treated as storms of feelings that well up from some unknowable region inside of us. It's thought that they need to be either contained or diverted, lest these feelings disturb others or embarrass us. This theory leaves kids with the self-injurious idea that emotions have no real purpose, that they just muck up our thinking, and that they make us say and do irrational, harmful things, and hence present a constant threat to our image and comportment. So there it is again. It's not only a mistake to tell kids that emotions are something that is some uncontrollable, irrational force, because they're not, right? Emotions are a way of dealing with the world to get what you want, to solve the problem, right? So it's wrong to confuse kids about emotions. But the other thing is that this framework where emotions are these irrational forces that you can't control, means it includes with it the threat, the point that you have this inner thing, this inner nature, this inner source of emotion that can get you into trouble, right? So it's about insecurity. It's about telling them that if you have to battle with your emotions, that at any moment you can be locked in battle, right? At a moment of intimacy, a moment of calm, a moment of that needs, aplomb or poise, you're always at risk of suddenly having to fight off or fend off emotions. That's a terrible idea to give kids, and it sets them up to have a battle with themselves. Okay. In reality, emotions bubble up for reasons. They are always about something. We feel grief about a loss, fear about a threat, and anger about being wronged. If a kid gets angry, it is a disservice to ignore the object of their anger and instead try to lessen or neutralize the angry feelings. In reality, resolving anger is about resolving the injustice in the eyes of the aggrieved, not about taking deep breaths or taking the feelings out on a punching bag. But training kids to suppress their anger without helping them correct its causes does precisely the opposite. It signals that understanding the underlying problem is irrelevant. They're essentially taught that they need to brush their teeth whether they like it or not, whether they understand or not, and that bursting out in anger is not appropriate. It's a double insult, forced to brush and forced to be quiet about it. It is interesting, right? Adding insult to injury, right? As often happens with rules. You get the rule, then the kid is upset about it, and then the being upset is also inappropriate or unacceptable, right? It's a part of dodging the problem with the rule in the first place, right? Instead of acknowledging and addressing the reason for the kid being upset, which is the compulsory rule, which is this arbitrary, unnecessary thing. In addition to that, you shield a discussion of that, the reason for the emotion, the rule being the reason that the kid is having a certain emotion. You just ignore the reasons and focus on the outcomes of the emotion. Disaster. I think it's a disaster. All right. Trying to mollify an angry person by telling them to breathe is a refusal to take them seriously. To take anger seriously is to inquire about the underlying problem and help the person solve it by their own light. Sorry, I said that a bunch. Emotions are good. In fact, they are among the best and most enriching things in life. Teaching kids to doubt or suppress or be ashamed of their emotions is potentially catastrophic. I'm going to say that one again. Emotions are good. In fact, they are among the best things, the best and most enriching things in life. I mean, a life without emotion would just be, it would be unlivable, right? I mean, it's hard to think of something worse than that. Get a little bit of backlight here. That just makes my face look bad. Emotions. So now, teaching kids to doubt or suppress or be ashamed of their emotions is potentially catastrophic. Right? You want them to live an emotionally rich life and to understand their emotions, to not be afraid of their emotions, and to use their emotions to get what they want, to solve problems. All right. To be sure, this doesn't mean we leave kids to exercise their anger any way they want, as that would be neglect. Instead, we help kids address the actual object of their anger, or sadness, or nervousness, or any other emotion authentically. We support their efforts to resolve it and learn how to express their emotions in a way that is consistent with finding a resolution. We open this section discussing desires. They are good too. It is possible to help a kid genuinely engage with any desire in a way that isn't dangerous. In fact, this is much of what becoming an adult is, expressing emotions and pursuing desires in productive ways. So desires are good. Getting what you want is good. Prosecuting your emotions is good. Emotions are not irrational. Emotions are not something uncontrollable. Emotions always have reasons, and helping kids recognize that and develop mastery, emotional mastery, not getting angry at the wrong person or getting angry in the wrong way. Right? Being angry and punching somebody is very different from being angry and punching a wall, which is different than being angry and punching a pillow, right? Punching a wall and injuring your fist. Now you're creating all these new problems, right? It's not a good idea. But that doesn't mean you don't express the anger. Helping a kid express the anger, but still taking a full interest in the root cause, I think is totally fine. So punching a pillow is fine if it's part of a process of addressing the root cause. Helping a kid with like breathing exercises to help them calm down so they can think about the root cause is reasonable. But in general, I think most of those efforts are instead trying to get a kid to stop being disruptive to us as adults, and then really not paying much mind about the root cause. Okay, that completes the second foul. We'll be on to the third and fourth in the next videos. It was fun.